Welcome back to another episode of the Sex and Spanglish podcast. I'm your hostess, Ana Lopez. I'm a sexologist and sex coach, and I'm here to help you change your relationship to sex so that you can enjoy it sin vergüenza. On today's episode, I'm going to be doing that by talking to you about my experience with endometriosis and how I'm currently treating this incurable disease. But before we get into that, I want to share something super exciting. I am bringing back something called textual healing. If you've been following me for a while, you may have heard me talk about this before. But textual healing is essentially having a sex coach in your back pocket. I'm decided to bring this offer back because I want a more flexible way to coach while I'm recovering. Something that I always encourage my clients to do is to take care of themselves out of the bedroom as well. Because if you are taken care of as a human being, you are going to be able to have better sex. When you are constantly tired, when you're constantly in pain, when you are just not feeling your best, you don't want to have sex. And so, the way that you begin to have better sex is by taking care of yourself first. So, with that in mind, I am bringing back textual healing. Textual healing is for the person who has been waiting to work for me. If you've been eyeing coaching for a while, but Zoom calls don't really fit your schedule, you're like, I got a lot of shit to do. I don't have time to be sitting on a 45-minute call every single week. Textual healing is for you. If you want support in the moment, I know that you've all had the experience where like something happens and you just need to like get it out to somebody. You need to get feedback on something, get some advice on something. This is what textual healing is for. You don't have to wait for support, right? You don't have to, you're like, I want to like share all of these things verbally and I just don't have time to do that on a Zoom call. I don't want to wait and 7 days, 5 days from now until I hop on a call with you. I want to share this right now in the moment. This is what textual healing is for. So I want you to imagine that there's something that's going on, something that your partner did, and you want to talk about it, but you're not sure what to even say. You just know you want to have the conversation. You're like, how the fuck do I bring this up? Textual healing is for you. Maybe you just got in an argument with your partner and you want to dissect the argument. You want to know, like, where do we go from here? How do I go about resolving this issue? Maybe it's an argument you have over and over and over again, and you talk about it, but nothing changes. This is what textual healing is for. Maybe you're in the market for a new lube or a new toy, and you're like, I have no idea where to even start, where to buy these things from. What do I even need? This is what textual healing is for. Maybe you have a question, but you don't want to figure it out on your own because you just Googled it and there's like 5,000, maybe even a million different Google searches. And you're like, I don't even know where to look. I don't know. They're all saying different things. How do I decipher who is right and who is wrong? This is what textual healing is for. So, when you decide to invest in textual healing, you will get 6 months of private coaching via Slack, which is a messaging platform where you and I can share voice memos, texts, images, whatever your fancy is. We will text and voice message one another back and forth. You will also get personalized sex education and resources as needed. So, if something comes up, you have a question about something that is more like sex education and not necessarily like personally related to you. So, you want to talk about discharge, you want to talk about birth control, you want to talk about, I don't know, pregnancy, for example. You can let me know, and I will create a personalized sex education video or resource for you. So I want you to think of this as like sex education on demand. I will also provide you with relevant resources, whether they be my own or from one of my colleagues. And then you will also get accountability and implementation support. So, what that means is if you're trying to implement something new, create a new habit, do something different, respond differently to arguments, I will hold you accountable. I'll be like, hey, you said you were going to do this thing last Tuesday. It's Thursday. What the fuck is going on? Right? I will help hold you accountable. And I will be in your back pocket because you can message me from your phone. And I know you have your phone in your hand 24/7. So, I do need to let you know that while I am super excited to offer textual healing again, and also shout out to Reagan if you're listening to this, one of my friends and former clients, she came up with this name and I'm seriously obsessed with it. So, if you're listening, Reagan, thank you again. I will be forever grateful. I am only offering 5 spots. So if this piques your interest, if you've been eyeing coaching for a while and Zoom, you like the decision to not do it right now is because of your busy schedule, go ahead and apply for textual healing now because there are only 5 spots available. The investment for textual healing is $2,000 and there are payment plans available. You can apply through the link that is in the show notes. Same link as always. So just go to the show notes, apply there. And applications are simply just a conversation. I want you to know that when you apply for one on one coaching, you are not signing your life away. You are not uh obli- obligating, yes, that's a word, obligating yourself to one-on-one coaching. Just because you fill out an application does not mean you are saying, hey, I'm absolutely going to do this. These applications are really just a conversation to see if coaching is a good fit for you in this moment. So go ahead and apply today. The application is in the show notes. Now, let's get into endometriosis and my experience with it. As I was preparing for this episode, I realized that I have a lot more to share than I originally thought. So rather than this being one episode, I'm actually going to break this up into 4 different parts. And you are going to get 2 parts this week. And then at a later date, you're going to get parts 3 and 4. And I'm doing this for a very specific reason. So, one, my voice just cracked. One, um, there's a lot to share. Um, so that's the main reason. And 2 is because I am still on this journey. I'm still in this process of treating this incurable disease. And this is the first time ever that I'm actually treating it. And so I want to share with you real-time updates. So I'm only going to be publishing the first 2 parts this week, which is going to take you from the very beginning to where I am at right now. And then in the future, as things come up, I'm going to be sharing a part 3. I'm going to be sharing updates. And then another episode that I have in mind, which I may release sooner rather than later. I haven't planned out exactly when I'm going to share that yet, but it is an episode that I promised on last week's episode, is how you can identify or find a doctor that is going to listen to you, that is going to take your symptoms serious and not just dismiss you and not just say, hey, take some ibuprofen, use a heating pad. Here is, I don't know, Monjoro is a very popular medication offered to folks who are struggling with things such as endometriosis or PCOS. They're not going to just offer you this like blanket solution. I have a very specific process that I use to find doctors that are going to treat me. So this is true of endometriosis, but this is true of, I use the same process for anyone who is going to treat me, including like massage therapists and even like other body workers, things like that. I'm very meticulous with who treats me for any reason, and I want to share that with you. So that is going to be an entire episode on its own because I believe that that process deserves its own episode. Today, I'm going to be talking about, in part 1, I'm going to be talking about my family history and how I got up to the decision to go ahead and decide to move forward with getting treated. So let's get started. I've blabbed enough. Let's start out with my family history. Now, I'm not going to share much about like who this is coming from because I don't want to share anyone else's story but my own. But essentially, what you need to know about my family history is that my mom has endometriosis. She also had a partial hysterectomy, which means that some of her reproductive organs, specifically her cervix, was left intact. Um, According to her, and I know she would be okay with me sharing this, which is why I'm sharing her information, is that she had really horrible periods. I remember growing up, this is like all I heard her talk about. Not all I heard her talk about, but she talked about it a lot. Like she would talk about how her periods were horrible and this, that, and the other. I knew that she had a hysterectomy. She also experiences something called phantom pain. So you may have heard of this, but it's essentially when you have pain in a body part and then the body part is removed and you still have that pain. So she has that in relation to her period. She doesn't have a menstrual cycle anymore. She's also like in her 70s, right? Like so she doesn't have a menstrual cycle anymore, but she still experiences that pain. And that's how we know that it's phantom pain. So that's my mom. My maternal grandmother, que en paz descanse, who what was I going to say? Sorry, I had a brain fart there. We suspect that based on her experience, she probably also had endometriosis. That said, when she was growing up, the science wasn't quite there. Um, and because she grew up rather poor, she there wasn't a way for there wasn't access, right? She did, even if that the treatment and all of that was available, she didn't have access simply because of her socioeconomic status. I also have my paternal grandmother, who thankfully is still alive. She also talks about how her periods were horrible. That said, there's not really any way of knowing whether or not she has endometriosis or something like PCOS or fibroids or anything like that, because she was never tested. And so we actually don't know. Um, and so she just mentioned, she had horrible periods. So it's possible that she has endometriosis or has it, right? If she has it, she has it. It doesn't go away. Um, so it's possible that she has it, but it's also possible that she had something else. So I just want to share that tidbit of information. I have several sisters, and some of them have had experiences with fibroids, who have had hysterectomies, things like that. I don't want to go into too much detail about, their medical history and whatnot, but I just want you to know, for the purposes of this conversation, that that is present. I'm sharing my family history first before I share mine because it is suspected that endometriosis is hereditary. It has not been confirmed, but essentially, if there is a history of endometriosis in your family, you are more likely to have it, particularly when it comes from your mother. Okay, so that's just why I wanted to share that. So, what about me? What made me suspect that I have it? So, I started my period when I was 14. And I always had really, really heavy periods. That was like the first thing that, like, it was like what is it called? The first thing that I like ticked off the box of symptoms of endometriosis. Since the beginning, my periods were super, super heavy. I remember the first day that I started my period. I remember this like it was like 5 minutes ago. I woke up in the morning to go to school. I was in junior high. I was in the eighth grade. I woke up, I went downstairs to go to the bathroom, and as soon as I pulled down my underwear, it was like a fucking murder scene. I was like, I had just woken up, so I was still, kind of groggy, whatever. I didn't feel it or notice it in my bed. Later, I realized it was all over my bed, and had seeped through the sheets. But it was like a murder scene. It was my all of my underwear. The entire thing was covered in blood. Um, and so I was in such shock. I told my mom. What I said was, I called her in the bathroom and I said, "I'm bleeding." And she's like, "Oh, you started your period, right?" And I knew that, but I was in such shock at the vast amount of blood that I was just like, "I'm bleeding." Like, I didn't know what to say. So I took a shower and I was going to get dressed, and my grandma was like, "Okay, let me show you how to put on a pad." Thankfully, because I was getting ready for school, right? And we didn't have any, menstrual products for me on hand. My mom had already stopped having her period. My sisters didn't live there with me at the time. And so it was like, where else would we get menstrual products? Thankfully, my grandmother, poor thing, had incontinence, like many elderly women do. And I want to divert here really quick to say that that is common but not normal. Incontinence, independent of who you are, is common. It is not normal. And so, if that is something you're experiencing, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to seek help from a pelvic floor therapist in your area, because that's not something that you have to live with forever. So, I digress. The point is, my grandmother had pads on hand, and she had the pads that she had were very absorbent, right? They were really thick pads, and they're similar to like overnight pads that you would buy, but they were super super thick, like very absorbent. And I wore one of those to school because that's what we had on hand. And my mom thought, hey, she's probably going to only need one for today. After school, we'll go and get her some more pads. Now, granted, I should have probably changed it throughout the day. But the reality is that one, I didn't. But two, I was still bleeding way too much. So if we think about an overnight pad, that should last you about 8 hours because presumably you're sleeping between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Now, I know most of y'all listening to this are, thankful if you get 5 to 6. That said, presumably we are sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night, which means that a pad should last anywhere from 7 to 9 hours, right? At the very least, 7 hours. So if I'm wearing an overnight pad during the day, and let's say school started around 9, so let's say I put it on around like 8, 8:30, because at this point it was like after a shower, so let's say like 8:30. Okay. Put it on at 8:30. By lunchtime, I had already bled over. And I had bled over a lot. Like it wasn't just a little bit. It was everywhere. So from 8:30, let's say lunch was around, we'll even say 12:30, right? We'll be generous here because I'm just guessing at these times, but generally speaking, let's say lunch was at 12:30. That's only 4 hours. There is absolutely no reason that you should be soaking a pad to that extent in 4 hours. I should be able to get to lunch and then change my pad. The same thing with a tampon. The same thing with any other menstrual product that you're using. You should at least be able to go 4 to 5 hours without changing it. Now, if you want to change it beforehand, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm not going to tell you what to do, it's to your own comfort level. That said, again, if you're soaking a pad, and actually, I even think it says on the packages that if you're soaking it in an hour, like that is not normal. Maybe I'm wrong here, but if you're changing your tampon, which I know several people that I went to school with would tell me that they change it every single hour. That it and they were wearing like the Super Plus tampons. That is not fucking normal. I need you to go see someone. And again, I'm going to be releasing a podcast episode and how to find a doctor that will listen to you and that is going to effectively treat you and that is going to work with you collaboratively because that is what doctors are supposed to do. But I want you to know that again, this is common, but it is not normal. So going back to my story, I that was the first you know, symptom that I discovered. At that point, I just assumed, like many of you, that that was normal. Oh, like I just have a heavy period. Okay, cool. Moving about my day. I learned to live with it. The second symptom that I identified, and again, I did not identify this like initially as a sign of endometriosis because at that point I didn't know what it was. I knew my mom had had a hysterectomy. I knew she had horrible periods. I did not know that she had endometriosis. Now she knew, but she didn't tell me that, right? Which, okay. I mean, maybe she should have told me, but neither here nor there. So at that point, I did not know that she had endometriosis, nor did I even know what that was. So I was just like, okay, I have heavy periods. I also had horrible cramps. So it started in my back. And I would always joke that my ovaries were like boxing because it was such bad lower back pain. And I would take ibuprofen and it wouldn't work. So I was just like, oh, well, fuck it. Then if it's not going to work, then I might as well not take any. And I just dealt with it. And that's just what I did. Later on, that happened like through junior high, like the rest of 8th grade, through junior high. I remember I was still having back pain up until like sophomore, junior year. And then as I ended up going into senior year and graduating and moving on to college, I began having cólicos in my stomach. And I was like, oh, this is almost worse than the back pain, right? And so I was having, the heavy periods still, I was having the cólicos still. And as the years went on, I think I was probably like 5 years post high school. I stopped having the back pain. I stopped having the cramping in my stomach. I started having vulvar and vaginal cramps. And in my personal opinion, those are the worst. They were so intense. It felt like someone was fucking punching me in my vagina. And I actually still have that symptom to this day. I feel like it's very tender, and so it hurts to sit, but it also hurts to stand. It feels like someone has punched me in my vagina. Sometimes I'll get really throbbing. Another symptom that I experienced and still experience to this day is I feel like a lightning bolt is going up my asshole. And it will happen time and time again. It's like a spasm in my asshole. Um, I also experience constipation leading up to my period. So during my luteal phase, which is like the 1 to 2 weeks before I begin bleeding, is I will experience extreme constipation. What's interesting though is I experience constipation outside of my period, which is a signature sign of PCOS and endometriosis both. If you are experiencing what most people would refer to as like PMS symptoms or symptoms that you would more so have on your period in between periods, that is an indication that you may have PCOS or endometriosis. So at this point in time, the symptoms that I identified were heavy periods, painful periods, um, pain that is similar to period pain, but I would have it outside of the time that I was bleeding. I would also have, what did I say? Oh, the spasms in my vagina, the spasms in my butthole, um, the feeling of like tenderness in my genitalia, the constipation. Now I know that the constipation leading up to my period and the constipation that was like just happening basically year round was also a sign. So if you are chronically constipated, or if you are experiencing any other kind of like bowel or what is it called? Like gastrointestinal issues. So things such as like heartburn. Why did I say it like that? Heartburn, constipation, diarrhea. These are often diagnosed as like IBS or leaky gut or things like that. But it could definitely be an indication that you have PCOS or endometriosis, particularly when combined with other symptoms. Now, if the only problem is the gastrointestinal problems, maybe I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical doctor, right? Um, it's maybe less likely that you have endometriosis or PCOS, but it's still something to keep in mind. Um, Another symptom that I have is chronic fatigue. Now, I had this for a really long time. I still haven't, but I never associated it with PCOS or endometriosis. Um, and I actually just barely learned this. I feel kind of almost like embarrassed to say, but like I barely, it, I knew that I had chronic fatigue, but I didn't associate the two. What I associated my chronic fatigue with was burnout, which, granted, the chronic fatigue is probably coming from multiple areas, right? It's probably not just coming from the endometriosis and PCOS that I have. And if I didn't mention this already, I will be doing an episode on PCOS specifically, even though it is closely related to endometriosis. I want to share, you know, more about that in a different episode. So the point is that I also have chronic fatigue. Um, so that is my experience. When I learned about endometriosis, I actually don't remember when I learned about it or how I learned about it. I actually think that I learned about endometriosis, and actually may have shared this in the last episode, but I learned about endometriosis when I was investigating PCOS. And I first assumed that I had PCOS. I was like, I have all of these symptoms. I also have like coarse hair growth on my chin. It isn't as significant as some women that have PCOS. Like some women that have PCOS can have like full grown beards. I don't have that. Um, but I do have rather coarse hair on my chin. Um, and it's kind of gotten worse throughout the years. Now, it could be perimenopause, but it could also be PCOS. I'm also pretty hairy. And so I assumed that it was because of PCOS. That said, it's um, is it like because I'm Mexican and German and both ethnicities are pretty hairy, or is it because I have PCOS, right? So I started digging, and I'll share more about this in the PCOS episode specifically, but I started digging into maybe I have PCOS, and I brought it up to multiple doctors and things like that I was seeing over the years. And the last two doctors that I've had, um, like my primary care physicians have said, like, and this is within the past like 10 years, we're like, yeah, we highly suspect that you have PCOS. And it kind of just left it at that. Most recently, though, I was like officially diagnosed, but I had already been telling providers that I had PCOS because I was like, yeah, I absolutely have PCOS. And so that was just like I was officially diagnosed within the past like maybe 2 years. Um, but the point is not my diagnosis of PCOS. The reason I'm sharing this is because this is what started my the unfolding of my endometriosis diagnosis. So as I was looking into PCOS, I learned more about endometriosis, and I began looking up what endometriosis is, why people have it, what causes it, all of those things. And so I began suspecting endometriosis. And then come to find out, my mom has endometriosis. I'm like, thanks, mom. Why didn't you fucking tell me this years ago? But neither here nor there. So that was how I came to the conclusion that I more than likely have PCOS. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, the only way to confirm that you have PCOS is by doing a laparoscopic procedure, which is the procedure that I just had done. But I am very close with my doctor. We do a really great job of collaborating with one another. And she was like, I can't like diagnose you, right? Like, you need to see a specialist for this. But I'm pretty sure that you have endometriosis, right? Like, it's safe to assume that you have it, given all of my symptoms. And I was like, okay. So, um, at one point, actually, before we get there, I want to share how this impacted my sex life. Um, so I had the conversation with my primary care physician a few years back, and we're like, yeah, like 99% certain you have it. So I just walked around assuming that I had it, and I considered getting the surgery for it, right? To getting that laparoscopic procedure, the one I just had done, to then see if there were lesions, to get those biopsied to see if it's actually endometriosis, and then move forward. But because based on what I had read at the time, was basically the treatment for it, because it's not curable, is birth control. And because I didn't want to be on hormonal birth control, I was like, well, it doesn't really make sense to get the procedure, because if they're just going to put me on birth control either way, then what's the point? Right. So I'll just not be on the hormonal birth control. Like that didn't make sense to me. And so I would have like random symptoms that would pop up from time to time, right? Like I would maybe go a while without like cólicos in my stomach and then they would come back, or I would go a while without constipation and then it would come back. And then it was like it would, or like a symptom would get worse. And then I would end up looking again into endometriosis and the treatment options and all of that. And I would always come to the same conclusion that if they're going to treat it with hormonal birth control either way, then there's not really a reason for me to go through with the surgery. And because it didn't make sense to me at the time to have a surgery just to confirm that I have a disease that they're only going to treat with birth control. If that's the case, then I might as well just be on birth control and call it a day, right? Like that didn't make sense to me in my mind. And also, before the surgery, I was very adamant that I would never, ever, ever have a surgery because I did not want to be put under. So I was very adamant that I wasn't going to do that. And I was like, well, I'm not just going to have a surgery just to have surgery. Like that's the way that I viewed it. Now I understand that some people like that's important for them and that is okay, but I'm sharing my perspective on this that I saw it at that time as having a surgery just to have a surgery, right? So that was that. That's where I was at a few years ago and even before that. So from the time that I suspected that I had endometriosis to the time that I had that conversation with my primary care physician about like, yeah, you probably have it, um, up until um, we'll say to the end of 2025, I was like, yeah, I have endometriosis more than likely, but um I'm not going to go I would say under the knife, but it was a laser surgery, right? Like I'm not going to have surgery for it and that's just going to be what it is and we call it a day, right? So, I want to talk about my treatment experience and what made me decide to go with through with the surgery and all of that. But first, I want to talk about how this impacted my sex life. So, up until about 10 years ago, sex was fine. Um, and actually, I would not constantly, I would have sex even more when I was on my period. I know that for some people, they don't like doing that. That is okay. But I do want you to know that you are um, allowed to, and it is totally okay and healthy to have sex on your period. And in fact, orgasms can actually help reduce symptoms that you will have with your period. Now, this isn't true for everybody, but it is it's pretty common that if you have sex during your period, it can help reduce cramps. It can help you get rid of any migraines that you might have, things like that. So, just something to consider. But if you're not comfortable having sex on your period, you absolutely don't have to. Um, so, I liked having sex on my period. It didn't impact my sex life at all. Like on my period, off my period, I didn't feel like my sex life was impacted at all up until recently. So within the past 10 years or so, I noticed that there was like a change in my libido. I wouldn't say that it's like very low. That said, um, my physical desire, which is something I talked about 2 episodes ago or 3 episodes ago, um, is that my physical desire was kind of waning. It's not that it wasn't there, but it I basically needed to have a lot more mental desire in order to have that responsive desire. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And I was like, well, I'm just tired. Well, guess what? The chronic fatigue has worsened within the past 10 years. So, of course, my libido has been impacted by that. Now, thankfully, because I have the tools that I have, I'm able to maintain my libido at a level that is comfortable for me. But I do recognize and realize and acknowledge that it takes me a little bit more work because of the chronic fatigue. So, the way that I'm treating that is by using the tools that I use with my one on one clients. So, if this is something that you're struggling with, again, I highly encourage you to apply for one on one coaching because it does not have to be this way. So I'm implementing the coaching tools I use with my clients, but I'm also helping myself by supporting myself through this chronic fatigue. I may not be able to get rid of it, but there are things that I do to support myself so that I can manage the chronic fatigue better. It's not about getting rid of it because that may be something that I never get rid of because, again, this disease is not curable. That said, that doesn't mean we just get to throw our hands up in the air and, wave the white flag and give up. No, absolutely not. I'm going to do things to support myself because it benefits me even if I never have sex ever again. Who the fuck wants to be tired all the time? I don't. I am, but I don't, right? I don't want to be. And so if I can support myself in a way where I am, you know, maybe I'm tired, but I feel, you know, a little bit better, even like 10% better, I'm willing to do that. Okay. So, all of that to say is that the chronic fatigue has impacted my libido. I'm doing things to manage that. Another thing that's recently started happening, I would say within the past 5 years, is that I began having pelvic pain. So it started by vulvar or not vulvar pain, vaginal pain. So your vagina again is inside, right? I want you to think of like the birth canal. That is where I started experiencing pain. And at first it was just a little bit, but then it got worse. And then it actually started, let me rewind for a second. It started with body pain. So I wasn't having vulvar or vaginal pain at the time, but I was having body pain. I was having neck pain, upper shoulder pain, and I think what I've honestly always had a really bad posture. It's embarrassing to say, but I've always had really bad posture. And when I started working from home during the pandemic, my posture got significantly worse. And I started experiencing, I have tech neck, I have horrible posture. I mean, it has gotten better in the past few years, but I was experiencing terrible neck pain and shoulder pain, upper back pain. And that's kind of how the vulvar and vaginal pain came into play. So I ended up developing TMJ, and I may have shared this already, but TMJs or your jaw and your pelvis are connected. So if you are having jaw pain, TMJ, such things like that, it can actually be indicative of pelvic floor tension and vice versa. If you're having pelvic floor tension, that can be causing your jaw pain or your TMJ to be acting up. They're very, very strongly connected. So I was experiencing neck pain, upper back pain, shoulder pain. Um, I wasn't really experiencing jaw pain. That said, when I went to go get treated for TMJ, I was experiencing jaw pain. I was just in so much pain. It was my new norm. I did not know that I was in the amount of pain that I was in. So, um, I ended up seeing a pelvic floor therapist, someone who I see now, or I still see today. And she kind of helped me out with some exercises for my neck, shoulders, and upper back. And she is the one that told me actually to seek out support for the TMJ because of the pelvic floor connection. Now, she did, do some pelvic floor releases and things like that. Um, but at the time, I wasn't really experiencing any pelvic floor tension. But as I started getting treated for the TMJ, I realized how much pelvic floor tension I had and how it was kind of like worsening. It was almost like waking up those symptoms in a sense. Now, I don't say this to uh, scare you into not seeing being treated, but oftentimes with pain and with body work, it often gets worse before it gets better. Similar when you start diving into trauma, right? Like you're like, this shit fucking sucks. But so it gets worse before it gets better. But it's, in my opinion, better to treat it than to just leave it untreated because you're going to be uncomfortable in the interim. So I began experiencing pelvic floor tension. I began experiencing pelvic floor pain, vaginal pain, and pain during sex. And so I wouldn't first, when I was experiencing, sorry, I feel like I'm jumping all over the place here. But things kind of happened all at once, which is why I'm jumping around. But um, it started with the body pain. So I began to seek treatment for that. That body pain was also is also related to the endometriosis diagnosis, and because of that, my sex life was impacted. Right, like if you're in pain of any kind, who wants to have sex? So that further reduced my libido. And now I'm able, I still have pain from time to time, but I'm able to effectively manage that. I have tools in my tool belt to help me with that. But it started because of that. As I began treating my neck and my upper back pain, my shoulder pain, I began noticing more the jaw pain, the pelvic floor pain. And I began noticing that having sex was painful because my vulva was very tender. My vagina was really tender. So, it was painful upon insertion, things like that. When I would have orgasms, it would be super painful. So I was like, this is not okay. So I continued seeing the pelvic floor therapist and I began seeing her even more so. And that really did help. Um, But when I stopped, obviously, like I was going to see her like fewer times, right? So instead of going every single week, I was going to go like once a month, once every few months. But I realized that if I don't keep up those exercises, my muscles tense up again. And so I realized, like, okay, like this is something I need to keep up with. But I also realized that this pain is likely connected to the endometriosis as well. Now, can we with 100% certainty tie back any specific symptom to a specific diagnosis? Not really. We can assume, just like with the trauma that I've mentioned before, like we can assume that the symptoms that I'm talking about tie back to the endometriosis, but it's not a guarantee. But the point is that they are related, right? We can, at the very least, say in some ways, like the pain that I'm experiencing is likely because of the endometriosis. And as you age, when you have endometriosis, it actually gets worse before it gets better because once you get your period, symptoms usually subside. Maybe they don't go away, but they usually subside. So, you know, it makes sense then, now that I'm 37, that it's gotten worse in the past 10ish years, right? Um, the other ways that endometriosis has impacted my sex life is because over the years, my constipation has gotten worse. And so I don't want to have sex when I'm constipated. Like, that's not fun. So, no, don't want to have that. And this may be a little bit of TMI for you all. That said, there's nothing that is TMI for me. Sorry, I think I just touched my microphone. But when I'm on my period, I actually end up having regular stools because I'm always constipated. So I have regular stools, so I want to have sex more. But now I'm so sensitive on my period that I don't really want to have sex. I do want to have sex, but I don't want to have sex because I'm so sensitive. You see what I'm saying? So there's that mental desire there, but I'm like, ooh, don't want to do it because I'm sensitive, right? So there's not really like there's even actually I would say even a physical desire, but I say no to that because I'm so sensitive, right? It would be like, I don't know, if you have the flu and you're like, oh, I really want to, oh, maybe that's a bad example. I think my experience is enough of an example of like I do have the mental desire, I even have the physical desire, right? Like I will feel horny on my period, but I don't want to because I'm so tender, even though I'm not constipated anymore, right? So that is another way that it has impacted my sex life. And in particular, within the past 10 years, is that these symptoms have started popping up. They're more frequent and all of that. So, what now? I want to share about how I decided to seek treatment. And I'm going to just briefly share it because I want to get into it even more so on the next episode in part two, where I'm going to go into the process of setting up surgery, right? Scheduling the surgery, the prep for the surgery, and all of that. But where did I go from, or how did I go from not wanting surgery at all, absolutely not, to I'm going to go through with the surgery and have it and all of the things. So it all started because I had made an appointment with my primary care physician, and I remember being in her office. And I don't even know why I was in there in the first place. It was something unrelated. I know that for sure. And she is a direct, what is it called? A direct primary care physician, a DPC. If you don't know what that is, I highly encourage you to look up DPC. Um, I absolutely love working with DPCs because they don't take insurance, which sounds kind of silly, but you essentially pay them now, depending on who your provider is. But for the most part, you will pay them like a monthly membership in the same way that you would pay for a gym membership. And you can see them as again, depending on the provider, but for the most part, you can see them as often or as little as you would like. The appointments are a lot more, they're longer, they're a lot more in depth. They're more holistic in my experience. So my PCP, for example, I will go in for one thing and she will check in about all of the other things that we've discussed in the past. I have fatty liver disease, and so she will have me provide updates on that. She will have me provide updates on my medical care team and what they're doing and what they've been saying and things like that. And so to me, it's more of an all-inclusive kind of healthcare, or more like holistic. And so I really like that. But so it's not uncommon for me to go in for something unrelated and then we end up talking about something entirely different, right? So if I go in for, like, I don't know, I have some, I don't know, viral infection or something, it's not uncommon for her to bring up, hey, like, how are you doing with your PCOS? How's the endometriosis coming along, right? Things like that. So I remember I had an appointment with her, and I don't even know what the hell we were talking about, but endometriosis was brought up more than likely. I think that's how the conversation went. And I think I had mentioned something. We were talking about insurance because while she doesn't take insurance, when we are seeking treatment for things that she does not care for, because again, she's a primary care physician, we talk about um, ways to help minimize costs when I'm going to have to pay out of pocket or use my insurance, right? So I remember we were talking about insurance, and I had said that I had met my deductible, and her eyes lit up and she was like, all right, we're going to use this to our advantage. I want you getting all of the things done that are going to require you to get paid. And so I remember bringing up, like, you know, maybe I can get checked for endometriosis. I don't know that I want to go through with the surgery, but I think it would be worth having a conversation with a doctor who would then perform the surgery, right? And she was like, absolutely. So she looked up a doctor that was in my network. I did not do the work here. She looked up a doctor in the network locally that she recommended, because I also have the habit of traveling for care, but that I'm going to talk more about that in the episode where I talk about my process of looking for medical care providers. Um, but the point is, she referred me to this doctor, and she said that, a lot of people said really great things about him. She had never worked with him personally, but that um, a lot of people had really good things to say about him. I, after I've seen him, I want to know who those people are, but I digress. So I went into the office and I was optimistic, right? I was open, I was curious. I wasn't fully certain that I wanted to go through with surgery, but my main reason for going in and talking to this doctor was that I had met my deductible. The appointment was free. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to lose anything by going and seeing this doctor and having a conversation about my endometriosis with this specialist, right? Someone who specializes in endometriosis. And I said, my thought process was, I can hear about what the surgery would be like. And if it's worth me getting based on my symptoms and my goals with treatment. And, is there a downside to just leaving it there, right? Like, am I doing myself a disservice by not getting the surgery, right? Because at the time I was just like, well, to me, it's like, okay, well, you're going to have the surgery to confirm or deny it, and then you're just going to be on birth control anyway. Like, and I don't want to be on birth control, so that doesn't make sense. So I was just really there to gather more information. And again, I wasn't paying for this, so I was fine with that. So I met with him, and the first thing he said was that, which is this is also another symptom that I had or have by the way, but I forgot to mention it, is that I also have irregular periods. So I could go many months without a period. I could have two in a month, right? Like very, very common for me, especially in the past 10 years or so. So I had mentioned, he was like, well, why are you here? And I was sharing all of my symptoms. And I said, I've been having this ongoing conversation with my primary care physician about this. And she recommended that I come and see you. Now, I made the mistake of saying that I had met my insurance deductible, which shouldn't have like meant anything about the conversation, but I do think it had an impact on the conversation. And so I said, I just wanted to have a conversation about what this would be like. I've also met my insurance deductible. So if I'm going to need surgery, I would rather do it this year. And at that point, we were in the fall somewhere. So maybe like September, October, around there. And, I was like, I'd rather do it now rather than later. So I wanted to have this conversation now, whatever. So he said, well, if your cycles are irregular, we would want to get you on birth control so that you could get your cycles regular before we actually decide to go through with surgery. And I said, well, I'm not open to being on birth control. And he said, well, then it doesn't make sense for you to have the surgery because not only can we with 100% certainty rule out endometriosis by doing this surgery. Either way, we would treat you with birth control after the surgery. So if you're not willing to be on birth control at all, then there's no reason in you having the surgery in the first place. Okay, well, this doctor is not open to listening to me, nor explaining why that is. And so I was immediately turned off, but he continued by telling me that if he went through with the surgery, that they could confirm that I had endometriosis, but that it's possible that they would leave things out or that they wouldn't be able to see certain lesions and things like that. And so there was no way to, with 100% certainty, like confirm that I don't have it, right? Which might very well be true, but it was the way that he was explaining it to me. And it was just very obvious that he was not willing to collaborate and care with me, which again, your doctors are the work that not the work you do. Like the conversations, the treatment that you get is in collaboration with your doctor. Your doctor does not tell you what you can and cannot do. It is a collaboration, which means your doctor, a doctor that is going to treat you, needs to be willing to collaborate with you. Now, they can have their own opinion. This doctor could have very well said, this is what I, this is, what I recommend. But if I'm not open to that, he needs to also be open to hearing me, right? And that just wasn't the case with this specific doctor. So, um, he just said, I'm not willing to go. Basically, he set a boundary for himself, which he's more than welcome to do. But he said, I'm not willing to perform surgery on someone who is not willing to get on birth control first. And I thought, well, that's odd, but okay, do you? And I said, thank you. And I left and I never saw that doctor again. I shared that with my PCP and she's like, yeah, I think your logic makes sense. Like if his only, treatment is birth control, then it doesn't make sense for you to go through with the surgery if you're not willing to be on birth control. And she was like, if that's the case anyway, you might as well just be on birth control and call it a day. Like, what? Like, that doesn't really make sense. And so my primary care physician and I thankfully were on the same page and I just let it go. Now, um, how did I get to finding a doctor or looking for another doctor? Because at that point, after I saw that doctor, I was like, you know what? Like, I was back in the same boat of I'm not going to get surgery. There's no point, and I just left it at that. Then one day, I remember exactly where I was when this happened. I was sitting on the love seat in my couch, or on my couch, sitting on the love seat in my living room, and I was on my computer, and I don't remember what I was looking up on my computer, but I randomly got this cramp that I've had off and on for the past, actually, for the past 10 years. I've had this cramp off and on. It is in the right lower quadrant of my abdomen, and it's in the same spot all the time. And I keep having it off and on. The first time that I had it, I was in Mexico. And so I went to go get treated. She told me I had a UTI. I was like, that sounds fake, but okay. And then I remember I've seen several doctors here in the States, and some have said it's constipation. I think we ended up landing on constipation the last time that I got it checked out. I was like, I actually don't agree, but okay. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't understand. Like, this can't just be constipation. Like, it doesn't even make sense, right? We've ruled out appendicitis, like all of those things. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me that I randomly have this pain. So, I was like, you know what? I want to look for a doctor that has endometriosis or that specializes in endometriosis. So, I started using the process that I normally use to search for doctors, and I found one. And then I decided, you know what? I'm at least going to have a conversation with him because, again, what I wanted to know was not whether or not will you operate on me. What I wanted to know is what are the implications of me getting surgery and what are the implications of me not getting surgery, because I could have very well just left it as is and went about my merry way. But I wanted to know if I do have endometriosis and I just leave it there, like if we're like, let's say 99% certain I have endometriosis and we just leave it there, then what happens? Like, does that have a negative impact on my health in the long run? I know that there are a lot of women that have endometriosis that haven't been diagnosed and therefore don't get treated, or that have it and just don't get treated, right? For a multitude of reasons. And maybe their lives are fine, but maybe not, right? They may have things that are happening to them, symptoms that are happening, or other negative health consequences that are are have been caused or have been like um yeah, caused by endometriosis, or endometriosis has been the catalyst for those other illnesses. Like, I don't know that there's any way of like confirming or denying that that is the case, but it's possible. And that's what I was concerned about. I look at things from a very holistic point of view in all areas of my life. And it's similar to the way that I coach, right? Like, your life outside of the bedroom impacts your life in the bedroom and vice versa. And I talk about this all the time with my clients. And you've probably, if you've been following me for a while, you've probably heard me say this. But that's how I look at my life as well. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to know, like, what are the implications of me not getting this surgery or not treating this disease if I do, in fact, have this disease? So I picked out a doctor and I went and I had the conversation with him. And upon physical examination, like he did a physical examination, and I'll go into more in that in part two. But he was like, yeah, with 99% certainty, I can say that you do, in fact, have endometriosis. Or actually, no, he didn't even say 99%. He said you absolutely do have endometriosis based on my physical examination of you, based on the scans that we've done. And I cannot tell you with 100% certainty what how severe it is. He said, I can tell you it's pretty damn severe. So there are four stages of endometriosis. So one, two, three, and four. Four is the most severe. And he said, based on he said, without doing surgery, there is no way of me knowing how severe the endometriosis is. But based on the thousands of women that I've worked with, you at bare minimum have three, if not stage four. And I said, well, that's cool. And based on that conversation, I ultimately decided to go through with the surgery. Now, that conversation wasn't the only reason I decided to go through with the surgery, but again, I'm going to go more into that. Ooh, sorry. I'm having a cramp. Um, okay, sorry. Um, I ultimately, obviously, decided to go through with the surgery, but more on that in part two. That is where I'm going to end here. I've been talking at you for over an hour. So I'm going to end here. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to be notified when part two comes out. Again, it's going to be coming out later this week. In the show notes, you are going to find the application to apply for textual healing. Again, 6 months of a sex coach in your back pocket for $2,000. And again, there are payment plans available. In the show notes, you will also find information about accessing the Endometriosis Foundation of America, where you can get more information and resources, and even scripts to use with your doctor and with any doctor that you see. There's even symptom trackers and all of that to determine whether or not you may have endometriosis. And again, you can listen to last week's episode where I go more in depth about this foundation, and I go more into depth about symptoms to look out for and things like that. Um, so that is all for today. I will see y'all later this week. Bye.